we are going to talk about spirituality and energy anatomy, or sex magic, in this video. Revisiting this concept of the sacred yes. I think that this is the central key to a conscious contraception, whether or not you want to study or practice Taoism or Tantra or Kabbalah or any of the ancient lineages that I'm going to provide you an introduction to. I believe that identifying and claiming your sacred yes is vital to having a healthy conscious contraception practice where we are rooted in love, where we are rooted and making embodied, aligned choices towards co-creating and procreating the world that we want to live in, the lives that we want to be participants in fully, rather than passively or fearfully avoiding a pregnancy. I think that naming and claiming what it is that we do want to conceive, gestate, and birth into being in this world that is not a pregnancy, that is not a child, is a way of honoring and being present with our innate power. We are incredibly powerful. Our sexual and fertile bodies are the most direct dial to divine creative energy that we have. It is one of the most bizarre and disempowering bits of fuckery from patriarchy and capitalism that our fertility, our ovulation, our menstrual cycles, and our sexual power, our orgasms, are something that most people with uteruses are afraid of instead of celebrating and claiming and owning as something that is absolutely profound and radical and beautiful, because we are the gates. We are the power that brings or does not bring life into our physical world. So this capitalistic, you're only valuable if you physically create a thing that you can then show me, or a baby, obviously in this situation, we're not giving birth to other inanimate objects, is something that we need to unlearn to be able to fully claim our power as hyperdimensional beings, in order to fully claim our power as emotional and spiritual beings, that we can live in this state of alignment and consciousness with our power rather than fear of it. So I offer you a handful of questions in your written materials, and I invite you to spend some time, ideally on a regular basis, not just once, but on a regular basis, take an inventory of what it is that you want to be creating with your ovulation, that you want to be creating with your lovemaking and your orgasms and your sexual power. Because if you're not identifying what it is that you want to create, then you are giving away your power by not claiming it. And there are, of course, no clinical studies researching this reality, but I strongly suspect that if before people made love, when it could potentially result in a pregnancy, if they sat and visualized and aligned themselves with a specific intention or desire or purpose that was specifically not creating a pregnancy or a human child, that we would have fewer unplanned pregnancies. And that just going through the motions and treating your body like a machine and being like, oh, well, I'm wearing a condom, oh, well, I'm not in my fertile window, or whatever it is, where you are not owning your power and being aware of the fact that you have this power to create life, that the sex act engages you with that divine creative energy, and it is potent. That we are able to create what we do want instead of avoiding what we don't, right? So rooting ourselves in this love, rooting in the sacred yes, rather than moving our physical, emotional, or spiritual bodies in fear of no, of being like, no, I don't want a baby, no, I don't want a pregnancy. Being able to fully own and claim our yes for ovulation and for sexuality is what I am suggesting is deep, deep medicine and deeply needed for our time. So please visit those questions, answer them for yourself, and if you do have a sexual partner who has sperm right now, please invite them to ponder what their sacred yes is and see if you can come to a place of alignment and agreement where you actually acknowledge and own this fact that you have the power to create life with this act. And you identify specifically what kind of life it is that you want to create. No value judgment from me, no rules about what it is that you want to create. And if pleasure is what you want to create, or fun is what you want to create with your sex act or with your ovulation, then go for it. That's awesome. That's really fun with manifesting apartments, jobs, and greater things in the world from this divine energy, from setting intention and doing meditation around ovulation and around potentially procreative sex, rerouting that energy, focusing it on something specific. I have not read that in a book specifically or received that from a teacher. I started using that in conversations about both contraception and abortion a handful of years ago. The other lineages and traditions that I'm going to discuss with you are mostly not mine. I want to be really clear that I'm sharing these ideas and I'm sharing these concepts. I'm a humble student. And with the exception of Kabbalah, because I am from a Jewish lineage, so I have a little bit more ownership of that practice. Always engaging with traditions from people's bloodlines and cultures that are not your own, with deep appreciation and not appropriation. If you are at all confused about what cultural appropriation is, I really encourage you to take some time on your own to look up some articles and do some exploration. And by giving honor to the lineage and the origins of the traditions, we are appreciating in a way that is different than taking and appropriating. And it's a very, very nuanced, delicate thing. And I walk very humbly and very delicately in sharing these other traditions with you. I want to go over some of the unifying principles that are present in all of the traditions of energy anatomy or sex magic that I'm going to be sharing with you, because they have more in common than not, right? The exact language and the exact mapping of the way that they identify the energy moving in the body and the meditations and the practices and the positions that you sit in and things like this may be unique to the lineage, but a lot of the philosophy and a lot of the principles are the same. And one of the main ones is that our sexual energy is sacred and holy. It has the power to manifest. It has the power to create ecstasy and transcendence and healing on many, many levels. All of these traditions agree that sex and sexual energy, which is your fertility, your ovulation and your sex, are one energy. They are the same thing. You can have one without the other, obviously, but the source and the quality of your energy that makes you fertile and that makes you sexual is identified to have the same source in all of these lineages, and that's something that I feel to be true. But this honoring of the reality that this quality of energy, this cycle of release and flow, which is inherent to both ovulation and orgasm, which is inherent really just to our breath also, which I'll talk about in another moment, that it is generative and that it is procreative and something of innate, inherent value, separate from its ability to create more humans. And that's something that is lost and often shamed, if not just completely omitted, from a lot of Western culture view of our fertility and our ovulation. And really of healthy sexuality, that there are many, many reasons that we would want to ovulate and that we would want to have sex and want to orgasm that are not having a baby, and that these ancient spiritual traditions have very specific practices for honoring and cultivating that energy instead of suppressing it or shutting it down. So, unifying principle number 1, our sexual and fertile energy is sacred and it has value even when we are avoiding or incapable of making a pregnancy. It has inherent healing power beyond pregnancy. The second one is that breath is life. Breath is life and energy. So all of these practices involve being present with your breath and respecting the way that when we focus our breathing in different aspects of our body, often with a visual connected to it, we are bringing more life force to that part of our body when we focus our breath in that part of our body. And we can use our breath to move and transform energy. Your body is a place to worship the divine. It's not out there. Yeah, there are places out there are temples out there are places of worship, but this idea that you don't need to go any farther than your own physical body, that we are created as vessels for the divine, and that it is a perfectly beautiful, natural, wonderful thing to worship in your body. Finally, you don't need a partner. Sexuality and fertility and the holy, sacred energy that we are able to cultivate through awareness and meditation and practice doesn't require that we interact with anybody else's genitals. Doesn't require that we are having potentially procreative sex. You, in and of yourself, your own temple, your own body, your own menstrual cycle, your own orgasm, all of these things that are inherent and accessible to you are sacred and divine. We don't need partners. We don't need external structures. We don't need external authorities to give us access to this beauty and to this power. So with that, I'm going to transition into telling you a little bit about Taoism, which out of the different traditions I'm going to discuss today, Taoism is the one I have spent the most time with. It just makes the most sense to me. It's super logical and well mapped out. The Tao means the way, and it's over 2,000 years old, comes from China. Taoism is like an umbrella of philosophy from which there are various lineages and all of Chinese medicine. So acupuncture and Chinese herbalism and shiatsu and all these different modalities that come from China are underneath this philosophical structure of Taoism. And there are all these different ways of mapping energy, sexual and otherwise, that come from Taoism. The yin and the yang symbol is one that most people are familiar with. And traditionally, the yin is associated with feminine and the yang with more masculine. Oh, that's another unifying principle, actually, that I forgot to add when I was going over the unifying principles, is that all of these lineages have some way of engaging with dynamic balance and honoring the dynamic balance of polarities and the way that you need them to create life, to create cycles and balance. And there's no hierarchy of these polarities. And we use the terms masculine and feminine a lot in our culture, but these energies are really beyond masculine or feminine. They're really beyond these ideas of gender that we are mostly stuck in with our social conditioning in our culture. But I will use that term a little bit because it just makes the most sense to a lot of us. It's like also hot and cold, light and dark, things like this. There are two main channels in Taoism, a yin and a yang channel. The yang channel begins at the perineum and goes up the spine, up our back, and then enters through the crown and comes down through the top of our mouth. It becomes the yin channel as it starts to come down. Yang energy goes up, yin energy comes down, and our tongue is a conduit when we place it on the roof of our mouth for the yin channel to come down through our chest, through the soft belly in our body, and then it meets again at the perineum. So these two channels together can be called the microcosmic orbit. And breathing with awareness of these channels and moving your breath with the in up, the yang, and with the exhale down, the yin channel, is one of the most basic beginner meditation, beginner Taoist practices to get used to when you are not sexually engaged or sexually aroused. Then you can move into doing microcosmic orbit breathing during your sex act, and it can move a lot of energy really powerfully. There's a book called The Multi-Orgasmic Woman that is co-written by Mantak Chia and a Western psychologist, Rachel Abrams, that I highly recommend. Is like your 101 intro to sexual practices and Taoism for people with vaginas. It is pretty heteronormative. It does use the word woman, obviously, in the title, Multi-Orgasmic Woman. And that title is such a hilarious bit of marketing. Having multiple orgasms is not the goal of Taoist practices. It is a really nice side effect, essentially, of being able to move that much energy intentionally and consciously. It is likely that your orgasms will get stronger, longer, become multiple. Your capacity for orgasms will expand. There's clinical studies and research referenced in that book around the way that these Taoist practices can help you heal irregularities and imbalances in your menstrual cycle, in your hormones, and many different other aspects of your health. Mantak Chia is kind of the main bridge from the Eastern Taoism to Western culture. He's written lots of books by himself and with his wife, some of them centered on sexuality, some of them not. They are a lot more nitty-gritty kind of technical terms, but the multi-orgasmic woman, the multi-orgasmic partner, and the Multi-Orgasmic Man are all really great, accessible books that Mantak Chia co-wrote with Western psychologists, and they have very simple, beautiful practices that you can access and implement today. Do it today. It's also in the 5-element theory. It maps all of our body organs on the yin or yang quality, and all of their interconnections are mapped on channels, on meridians throughout the body. And this is what people are stimulating if you've ever had acupuncture, as they're stimulating the energy meridians to help the communication happen. And so our fertile energy, our ovulation energy, our orgasm energy are all things that have very specific practices within Taoism, where you can do meditations and visualizations and special kinds of breathing to be able to harness and move that powerful energy in your body in respect to this energy mapping, to this circuitry that has been tested and practiced for thousands of years really beautifully. From there, I'm going to talk just for a little bit about Tantra and Kabbalah. Tantra means the weaving, right? Or woven. So it's all about the interconnectedness of our existence and the universe and this unity. The main sexual energy anatomy in Tantra is connected to Kundalini and the chakras. Kundalini means coiled one or snake, and it is meant or believed to live in the base of the spine, right? So we have again this like, okay, the yang channel starts in the base of the spine, the Kundalini energy starts at the base of the spine and the perineum. Clearly a very sexually centered location. And so there are specific practices. Kundalini yoga is one of many for cultivating this Kundalini energy, again with this goal of taking this powerful, intense energy from our genitals and our reproductive organs and moving it up through the body, ideally all the way up through the crown and our consciousness, and helping us integrate that we are part of everything and that we are connected to everything. And rather than our orgasms or our ovulation being lost by going down and out, or being centered or stuck in just this part of our body, a lot of these practices are focused on using breath and visualization to move that energy intentionally for healing or enlightenment or ecstasy. Chakras are another concept within Tantra. A lot of folks are familiar with chakras. They are essentially like energy vortexes in the body. They translate as wheel or vortex. The word chakra means wheel or vortex. And root sacral chakra is the first one, and then there's they move progressively up the body. You need to have health in all of them to have health in any of them. When there is an imbalance or a blockage anywhere in the chakra system, then you are prone to have disease or dysfunction in other aspects of your body. Same for Taoism and all that circuitry and the meridians that I spoke of. While this conversation is focused on sexual and therefore fertility anatomy for the energy, all of these traditions are deeply honoring of holism, of this reality that you cannot compartmentalize and think like, oh, well, I have a blockage in this one chakra, so it's not going to affect my sexual chakras. And also, as above, so below. Tantra has some really beautiful and unique things to say, essentially about it correlates with the sphincter law in the way that our throat chakras and our second chakras have deep connections and correlations as well. Our ability to express ourselves creatively and feel safe and expressive sexually is directly related to our ability to speak our truth and express ourselves verbally, vocally, and move that energy through our throats and through our mouths. Another thing that's really interesting to me about Tantra, a lot of folks really regulate it or relegate it to, partner sex and think like, oh, I'm going to go take a Tantra class so I can have better sex, which is like, great. Like, there are sexual branches of Tantra. It is also a Buddhist philosophy branch and generally just a way to live your life and engage with life in a way that is encouraging unity consciousness and a way that acknowledges and respects that we are all connected and that we are all one. My favorite Tantra book, the first book I read on Tantra, is called Desire. It's in your resource section, and there actually are not any physical sexual practices in that book. It is just a philosophy book. And one of the main teachings that I took from that is this idea of lovemaking all day, every day, of bringing this concept of lovemaking and weaving ourselves, right, which is what lovemaking is, this overt connection and unity, that every act that we take, every word that we speak to another, to brushing our teeth in the morning. I remember in the introduction to that book, the author talks about bringing your toothbrush to your teeth as an act of lovemaking, and just realizing and engaging with this intention and this consciousness of fully participating and being present and being one with the moment and with your actions, instead of disassociating or imposing fully your will, like being in that co-creative dance of unity consciousness and moving with loving intention, knowing that there's a level of sensuality and love that we can bring to all of our actions and all of our interactions, and that lovemaking and this procreative, powerful energy is not simply about our genitals, and it is not simply about sexual interactions with others. Tantra is over 5,000 years old, and it also originated as political rebellion, as political revolt, because of the caste system in India, which not only created huge compartmentalization and separation between the different castes and saw like some people as more holy and capable than others, but also encouraged this compartmentalization between the mind and the body and the spirit, which we see a lot in Western culture today now also. And so Tantra was about removing those barriers and finding the sacred in the mundane, and acknowledging that our bodies are sacred. Everything that we want, our feelings of desire, are sacred. Really blessing and being present with the quality of our desires and how to express and honor our desire is another thread that weaves through all of these different lineages. In Taoism, there's specifically a connection between the idea of our desire and our destiny. And I feel like that weaves really beautifully into this conversation about the sacred yes, and being able to really fully own, identify, articulate what is our sacred yes, what is our true desire, and the way that our sexual power and our fertile power helps us manifest that and engage with our destinies, rather than shaming or thinking that our desires are unholy, really recognizing that we have innate wisdom in the way that our bodies and our beings want to move, and what we want to create and make has this value that is almost prophetic and can help create our realities in a healthy way. It's at your resource section, but I just want to mention Anodea Judith is my favorite author if you want to go deep into the study of the chakras. She's also a Western psychologist, I believe. Her books, Wheels of Life and Eastern Body, Western Mind are two of my absolute favorites. And they all have very robust, rich, beautiful sections talking about the two main sexual centers and our fertility and the way that we can heal and cultivate wellness in those centers that carry so much shame and so much trauma in our culture. These lineages are vast. There's so many texts and so much writing about them. I share just a few of my favorite resources in your resource document for you to begin exploring. I really recommend finding a teacher that you love, even if that teacher is an author and you don't get to sit with them physically, but you can find a voice that you like to listen to and follow it. Kabbalah translates as the receiving. And I think that is so beautiful, and it's so bizarre and unfortunate how there's been a lot of like pop culture interest in Kabbalah that is not about receiving. It's really been like, you know, about taking. And the traditions around Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, ask that you be offered teachings by somebody who has wisdom rather than you go and seek of your own volition. So the idea is that if you are to learn about Kabbalah, you are to receive it from an elder on your path as a gift freely given. It's not something that you would like buy a book about or go pay for a class and be like, I'm gonna go learn about Kabbalah. Just being open to receiving at the right time and the right place to be able to receive the wisdom of Kabbalah, to be able to receive the blessings of the divine in the way that it moves through Kabbalah. I was gifted a book about Kabbalah when I was about 21, and that was my first introduction into the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, which is the energy anatomy map that I offer you in your handouts. Similar to chakras, the Kabbalistic Tree of Life has something called Sephirot, or Sephira is the singular, Sephirot is the plural, and they are also energy bodies that are correlated with both a masculine on the right side and a feminine on the left side, which is the same as Taoism. They had the same yin-yang predominant parts of the body. So there's seen to be a more masculine and feminine branch in the Tree of Life, and then they have unifying principles that run down the middle of the body. Malkut, or Shekhinah, would be the kingdom or the queendom, and the root Sephirot, very similar to the root chakra in a lot of ways. And then also in Kabbalah, there are different levels of consciousness for our souls. And Nefesh is the primal sexual body in Kabbalah. Most of the Tree of Life concepts come from a method of getting from the sacred to the mundane, right? The bridge, a body as a bridge, or the tree of life as a bridge with the roots in the earth, in the mundane, in the earthly realm, and the branches going up into the astral body. And in the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, the Sephirot that correlate to the body, our body is that bridge. Our body is the tree of life. And I was familiar with this metaphor and had studied the Sephirot for years, and I had been attending births for many years before finally a midwife showed me the placenta after a birth and pulled on the cord, and lo and behold, where the cord meets the placenta, it branches out, and it is so obviously and so beautifully a tree. So I just wanted to share that little bit of practical, literal knowledge about where we come from, how we got here, and that there's this mythology around the tree of life being the way that our physical bodies and the divine realm interact. Again, I'm really just giving you a little overview into terminology and concepts. If you want to actually study or practice any of these traditions, you have a lot of work to do to be really respectful and mindful of them. But these are all traditions that honor and have methods for cultivating sexual and fertile energy that are not for making babies. And I think they are so supportive to that sacred yes, and to this reality that we are incredibly powerful conduits for the divine, even when we are not making babies, and that we don't need to be treating our bodies as machines and shutting them down or manipulating them to try and avoid a pregnancy. That rather than focusing on that no or focusing on that fear, we can use some of the language or the concepts and the philosophies that I've offered you from these lineages or others, or make up your own, but fully embrace and fully embody the fact that we are creative, powerful beings, and that our fertility and our sexuality is inherently generative and inherently powerful, and that ignoring it or shutting it down is not healthy. We have a lot of different traditions and different healing practices and spiritual practices that can support us. And I hope that you feel that these structures, rather than being overwhelming or intimidating or dogmatic, that if you feel called to study some of these philosophies or start practicing some of them, that they can support rather than confine your creative power, and that you're able to engage with this energy of your ovulation, of your fertility, in a meaningful way that is really honoring and respecting your divine power, your divine creative power, and the unique fractal of creation that you are. And that we don't need to compartmentalize these aspects of our lives or of ourselves, that the more of our intellectual and spiritual selves we can bring into our acts of contraception or our acts of sexuality, the healthier that we can be, and the healthier that our relationships, not just with ourselves and one another, but with the divine, with the world around us, with the universe as a whole, that we feel connected to this amazing web of life in this process, and that we're not doing something against nature at all. We are moving with our desire, with the force of nature that is our own desire and our own will. Wishing you many blessings and many orgasms.